Chapter 65:19. When he came to the side of the four-sided treasure tower, Charlie stretched out his hand and gently touched it. Then he kept an eye on his sea of consciousness, hoping that the plague god would leave at the right time. He thought that approaching the four-sided treasure tower would allow the mysterious thing in the sea of consciousness to leave at the right time. But the mysterious thing had not made any movement, as if it had disappeared out of thin air. At this moment, he suddenly realized that the thing did not seem to want to return to the four-sided treasure tower. He couldn't help but think to himself, "Is this thing going to stay in my body?" Thinking of this, he peered into his consciousness, disconnected all senses to the outside world, and focused all his attention on the sea of consciousness, trying to find the trace of the plague god. But the other party really disappeared out of thin air, leaving no trace. And the four-sided treasure tower in front of him did not react at all after being passed into the spiritual energy by himself. And there was not even any flow of spiritual energy. He couldn't help but feel uneasy. This thing absorbed so much of his spiritual energy, but it could still hide in his sea of consciousness like a grain of dust. It must be extraordinary. And now Charlie couldn't judge whether this thing was good or bad. Apart from other things, just from the fact that it lured him into a trap. It was probably not a good thing. Maria walked up to Charlie at this time and whispered to him, "Master, have you found anything?" Charlie nodded and said vaguely, "It should be related to it." Then she hesitated for a moment and asked again, "Can it be solved?" Charlie shook his head and said, "It won't leave." Maria's cherry mouth opened slightly, wanting to say something, but held back. Then, after a pause of a few seconds, she asked, "What are your plans now, Master?" Charlie sighed and said, "Let's go home." After that, he said to Ethan and the military representative not far away, "I just want to confirm whether there is anything abnormal with the four-sided treasure tower. There is nothing else to stay here for. Sorry to bother you." The military representative immediately said, "You are polite. If you are sure that you don't need to take a look or study it again, then we will go up first." "Okay." Charlie nodded. Before leaving, he took another look at the four-sided treasure tower. Suddenly, an idea came to his mind. He thought to himself, "When I first saw the four-sided treasure tower, I accidentally used my spiritual energy to scan it. Unexpectedly, it had great magical powers and actually absorbed my spiritual consciousness in, presenting to me the grand scene of Master Xuanzang and many other great powers building the four-sided treasure tower. Since it is a magic weapon, why not pass some spiritual energy into it to see if there will be any reaction? Maybe it can awaken the four-sided treasure tower, or trigger a certain mechanism of the four-sided treasure tower." So, he said, "Wait a minute, I have something else I need to confirm again." As he said that, he injected a wisp of spiritual energy and a wisp of spiritual consciousness into the body of the four-sided treasure tower again. What surprised him was that this time, when the spiritual energy was injected into the four-sided treasure tower, the four-sided treasure tower did not actively guide his spiritual consciousness, or lead his spiritual consciousness to a certain illusion. On the contrary, when his spiritual consciousness entered the interior of the treasure tower and was not disturbed by anything, he found himself inside the treasure tower. Compared with his spiritual consciousness, the treasure tower at this time was magnified more than 100 times in proportion, as if he was inside the real treasure tower back then. Looking up at the internal structure that was tens of meters high, he was amazed. And the more incredible thing was yet to come.